So speaking of that, they're making another scary movie and it's scheduled for 2026.
What, seriously?
Yeah, it's being made.
That's going to be terrible.
I'll say what I will say is that it was, and discussed by kind of like Marlon Wayans, is that they had kind of like ownership over the first two, and then the studios kind of wrestled the franchise away from them, and they weren't able to sort of be directly involved in some of the sequels that came afterwards. So potentially that's like positive signs in terms of like it's kind of going back to sort of its original creators, the ones that sort of kind of birthed 1 and 2. But I am kind of also concerned in that, trying to recapture the magic of the past, trying to, again, like going back to an old franchise.
Yeah, I think there's just a few question marks. Like, where are the Wayans at now? Do they have the same sense of humor that they had 25 years ago? If not, what is it? And if it is the same sense of humor, does that still have an audience? And will a studio invest tens of millions of dollars into a movie that will, at minimum, be controversial if it's the same kind of thing? There's just like all sorts of questions I have about, or more like I'm not necessarily looking forward to watching the movie, but I'm kind of just curious what it turns out to be and how it gets received and what kind of audience it attracts.
Be a sense of like anyone that's like maybe like nostalgic for Scary Movie 1 or Scary Movie 2 and probably hadn't seen it in a long time and maybe stumble upon the new movie. There's the potential risk of like that sense of disappointment of it not being as edgy or it not kind of like living up to what you remember sort of Scary Movie being, at the time of sort of watching it as well. If it's not going to go to some of the length on comedy, then you're kind of like running a really big risk as well of just like people just like feeling underwhelmed by the movie.
Legacy sequels have a very poor track record, right? The vast majority of them they either come across as really tired and exhausted, or they just don't have an audience anymore. Like we had this with The Crow last year. This is a story that's very rooted in 90s culture. And just doing a story about a goth kid that becomes like an angel of vengeance in like 2024 does not resonate with anybody, right? Because it does not tap into youth culture as it actually exists at that point, right? So you either keep it the way it is, and in which case it barely resonates with anybody, or you update it to keep kind of the core of it. But then your established audience says, I don't recognize this, right? So that I think that is a massive challenge. Like I've seen people say, or there's like an entirely new generation of horror movies that can be lampooned, like if they took the piss out of like elevated horror. But then that sounds a whole lot smarter than what they've been doing in Scary Movie, right? Because in Scary Movie, it's not really about the movies. Like the movies are like the framework, but then the jokes themselves are just stoner humor.
But do they have to follow the same system that they've done all this whole time? Can't they like change it up? Like,
sure, they can change it, but if they change it, that's a risk. Or it's so careful and so managed that it stops being funny because they just won't take any chances at all. Whichever way you slice it, it's weird. Like, why pick that? Why not revive some other comedy that's maybe like the Police Academy movies have also not aged terribly well in a few different areas because of just how 80s comedies tended to be. But you can make I don't think those are ways that are essential to what's appealing about a Police Academy movie. So I think you can update that premise in a way that still works today. And I don't know, like with Scary Movie, that seems to be the entire point. I don't see how you can update Scary Movie without turning it into something completely different. It's just looking at this, like it's just so far removed from the zeitgeist. So I'm just not sure like how a Scary Movie would slot into that. But we'll see next year, I guess.